Welcome back. Welcome back to the April 19th through 20th, 2023 board meeting. My name is Sung Oh, President of the board. Before we convene, I would like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing pharmacy law. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. This meeting is being conducted consistent with the provisions of Government Code Section 11133. Participants watching the webcast will only be able to observe the meeting. Anyone interested in participating in the meeting must join the WebEx meeting. Information and instructions are posted on our website. As I facilitate this meeting, I will announce when we are accepting public comment. I've advised the meeting moderator to allow 3 minutes to each individual providing comments. This approach is necessary to facilitate this meeting. Before we get started, I'd like to ask staff moderating the meeting to provide general instructions. Moderator?
Thank you. For today, before we get started, I'd like to remind board members and staff who are not speaking to mute their microphones when not speaking. If I detect background noise during the meeting as a result of unmuted microphones, I will mute that microphone. We do have members of the public in the audience and meeting minutes are being taken, so I also ask that members and staff please identify yourselves before speaking. For public comment today, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature. You may also hear us refer to it as the Q&A. When the president calls upon public comment, we will open that feature. And to submit comments through that, you will be asked to click on the question mark. If it doesn't appear on your screen, the question mark icon, it's typically at the lower right corner of your WebEx screen. You can type in the word comment into the available text box and then send that so that you can be recognized. Comments should be limited to the topic addressed in that specific agenda item. We will display the instructions you see now on the screen at that time. You may also choose to raise your hand if you're a call-in user, and you can do that by dialing *3 to raise your hand and then *3 again to lower your hand. Each commenter will be invited to unmute themselves in turn, and each commenter will have 3 minutes to speak with a 10-second warning. At the end of that time, your microphone will be muted and we will move on to the next commenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Appreciate that. Okay, now we'll take a roll call to establish a quorum. Maria Serpa.
Licensee member present.
Thank you. Good morning, Maria. Jig Patel. Jig may be joining later. Renee Barker.
Licensee member present.
Good morning, Renee. Indira Cameron Banks. Don't believe Indira is able to join today due to family emergency. Trevor Chandler.
Public member present.
Good morning, Trevor. Jesse Crawley.
Licensee member present.
Thank you. Good morning, Jesse. Jose De La Paz.
Public member present.
Good morning, Jose. KK Ja.
Licensee member present. Thank you.
Good morning, KK. Kula Koenig is not joining today. Ricardo Sanchez.
Ricardo Sanchez, public member.
Good morning, Ricardo. Nicole Tebow. Nicole is not joining today. Jason Wise. Jason is not joining today, and I am here. A quorum has been established. All right, members, we got a lot of committee reports today. So agenda item 14, we'll get right on it. Enforcement and Compounding Committee Report. I will turn the meeting over to Dr. Maria Serpa to provide a report from the Enforcement and Compounding Committee. As I do so, I would like to sincerely thank our Chair Maria Serpa for her leadership in guiding the committee through the development of some very technical requirements governing the practice of compounding. The thoughtful and collaborative approach I have observed while serving on this committee is truly commendable, and all the staff and Christina Costa and all the Inspect PEG for their hard work, countless hours gone on the last few months of this is just totally commendable. And I sincerely appreciate your time and dedication to public protection and for your dedication to California consumers. Thank you all. So Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President O, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of the committee, I'm pleased to provide the board with a summary of the committee's efforts at its meetings this quarter. Thank you to my fellow members, Vice Chair Jig Patel, Renee Barker, Indira Cameron Banks, Sung Oh, and Ricardo Sanchez. As indicated in the meeting materials, the committee has met several times to review new and revised USP chapters related to radiopharmaceuticals, hazardous drugs, sterile and non-sterile compounding, and the board's related regulations to determine what, if any, changes are necessary based on the actions of USP. This has been a significant undertaking. Actually, you mentioned months that we've been meeting. This has been years in the making. This committee has been writing regulations and dealing with this subject for many years. As we get started with this report, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the committee members and to the stakeholders who participated in this process. We had significant stakeholder involvement recently and in the past, and it's truly been beneficial to what I think is our final package today. Agenda item 1, summary of presentations on USP general chapters. As a part of the committee process prior to considering proposed changes to the board's regulations in the respective areas, members and stakeholders received an overview of each of the USP chapters. Presentations were provided on USP Chapter 825 regarding radiopharmaceuticals, USP Chapter 795, pharmaceutical compounding, non-sterile preparations, USP Chapter 797, pharmaceutical compounding, sterile preparations, and USP Chapter 800, hazardous drugs, handling in healthcare settings. Supervising inspectors Acosta, Kalantar, and Panella Spangler provided summary presentations and served as subject matter experts during our discussion. We are truly fortunate to have experts available to share their knowledge with the committee as we considered the proposed language and regulations that we will be discussing today. The presentation slides are included in the meeting material, as well as FAQs for each of the USP chapters. Please note the slides for the USP chapter. Please note that the slides for USP Chapter 795 that was present in the meeting materials was taken from a staff presentation. These slides are now updated on the website for today's presentation, and there are the slides that we received during the committee meeting. I apologize for the mix-up there. The material is the same, just it's a lot more depth, and so this was the one that was presented to the committee is now on the website. I strongly encourage licensees that have not considered the new and revised chapters to begin doing so now. Hopefully you've done it already. There's a lot coming up because these changes become effective November 1st, 2023. Members, I do not plan on reviewing the presentation materials. Before I open up to all members, I would like to ask my fellow committee members first if they have any additional comments regarding the presentations that we received over the 4 committee meetings. Committee members, do you have any comments? I can't see everyone's hand, so if I missed you, please do speak up. Okay, members of the board, do you have any questions about the meeting materials that we have in the presentations we have in the meeting materials? They were very comprehensive, so I appreciate that. Moderator, let's open the lines for public comment on the various presentations.
We are now accepting public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. And our first request for public comment comes from Ned. Hold on just a second, Ned. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. All right, Ned, we see you've unmuted.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to come before you on the important issue of excluding flavorings from compounding. First off, I want to take a moment.
Excuse me, Mr. Malenkich, we have that on the next agenda item under
Yes.
US Chapter 795.
I'm
This is
sorry, I
regarding
thought
the
you were opening the floor for a comment on it at this time. I apologize.
No problem. This is comment on the presentations that were provided to us by the board inspectors on the 4 chapters of USP. Your topic is very important, and I do want you to make sure that you do get in line to talk when we get to 795, non-sterile compounding. Noreen, is that appropriate?
Dr. Serpent, this is Eileen
Yes, that's
Smiley,
appropriate.
and yes, that is appropriate. Right now, we have public comment only on the presentations. We'll have additional time for comment over the specific, in the sterile and non-sterile when we take up those specific items.
Okay. And can you help me also, because I feel very bad for interrupting our public members with when that does happen, when they mistakenly get on for public comment in the wrong section. I would find that very helpful if you could help me monitor that, because I certainly don't want to cut off any public comment.
Absolutely, I will. Again, you beat me to the punch this time.
Thank you. Go ahead, moderator, with the public comment.
All right. Next, we have a hand up from call-in user 10. Bear with us just a moment, caller 10. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You'll need to dial *6 in order to unmute in some cases.
Yeah, good morning. My name's Van Allen from Modesto, and when I heard about this, it reminded me of my own kids and how difficult. I mean, it was a nightmare trying to get them to take their medication. And
hi, this is Eileen Smiley, DCA counsel. We're not trying to cut off public comment. I think you're going to the food flavoring, which we would ask that you hold off to that comment once we get to the non-sterile part. It's very important. We'll talk about it there. But at this point, we have opened up public comment only on the presentations that were included in the materials.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I came in late and I wasn't aware of that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And with that, we have no more requests for public comment. Do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. And we have a very complex committee report, and I just ask for everyone's patience as we go through the different steps. We will be reviewing each of the chapters individually, and there'll be an opportunity for public comment in those respective sections. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask us if you're in the appropriate section, and the moderator and the DCA attorneys will help us to make sure that public comment is provided and listened and heard appropriately. I appreciate all the public that are on the committee on this board meeting today. We're going to move on to agenda item B, discussion and consideration of possible action on the proposed changes to regulations. I'm very excited that we are at the point where the board can move regulation language into the initiation of rulemaking process in support of consumer protection. Many of these regulations were initially developed in 2019, but were suspended in response to the USP's September 2019 announcement delaying the official date of the revised chapters 795 and 797 and new chapter USP 825. As the board announced in its policy statement at the time, this was back in 2019, the board encourages licensees to move toward compliance with the provisions of the revised chapters and encourage utilization of USP chapter 800, which was about hazardous drugs, in advance of to advance public health. As you may recall, USP chapters 800 was not subject to any of the appeals, and therefore it was just put on pause because it was related to the other chapters. The appeals were on chapter 795 and 797. As a part of the board's policy statement, the board encouraged licensees to continue efforts to transition to the proposed USP requirements to ensure patient safety and efficacy of compounded drugs preparations. Those stakeholders that have done so are well positioned to be compliant with the chapters when they become compendial on November 1st, 2023. Thank you to the stakeholders that took proactive steps to implement the provisions to improve patient care. For our discussion and consideration today, We'll review 1 revised and 3 proposed new articles covering the various areas. I intend to review each article separately to allow member discussion and the opportunity for public comment. Only after consideration of all 4 articles and the related regulations is completed do I intend to have the board take formal action on the articles as a single package if we determine such action is appropriate. It's important to share the process that the committee used to develop these regulations. As I previously mentioned, the proposed changes to regulations began in 2019. We held many meetings with stakeholders at that time, both in Northern California and Southern California. Those efforts were suspended when USP paused implementation to review the appeals. The language developed in 2019 served as the starting point for the language before the board today. The committee dedicated 4 recent meetings to review the proposed language, and those meetings recommenced once USP took the USP language off of pause and announced the compendial date of November 1st, 2023. During each committee meeting, the committee provided significant opportunity for public comment on each section. That was each section of each article. So as you'll note, there are sometimes 12 to 15 sections in each article, and we had comment on each and every one. In addition, the committee considered written comments written in advance of each meeting. During my report today, we will not be going through each section. I intend to provide some summary comments on the respective articles and the regulations, provide an opportunity for committee members to provide comments, followed by an opportunity for the full board to discuss the proposed regulations. Then I will open it up to public comments. Members, unless you have any questions or concerns with this process I intend to use, I will proceed. So just to be clear, members, I'll be discussing each article in summary. While the committee did go through the 14 to 15 sections individually and had discussion and comment individually, we cannot repeat the committee meeting here at the board, so we'll just do a summary of the articles in total, all 4 articles. Any comments or questions from board members before I continue? As I begin, I'd like to remind everyone present of a few important items. First, this is the beginning of the rulemaking process. There will be additional opportunities to provide comments during the formal rulemaking process. To ensure we meet the timeframes necessary, I suggest we focus on policy issues today and avoid wordsmithing. There's a myriad of state and federal laws that licensees must comply with, including relevant provisions of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, 503A provisions, USP chapters, plural, state statutes, and board regulations. It is important for licensees to remain mindful of all the legal requirements, not just those established in Board of Pharmacy regulations. To that end, the proposed regulations will not restate federal requirements, nor will they be restating USP standards established in the respective chapters. The board's regulations are in addition to federal requirements, USP chapters, and California statutes to clarify or make more specific, consistent with the board's authority and consumer protection mandate. If no clarification is needed or no additional requirements are necessary for public safety, there is no additional language being proposed today. Ms. Smiley provided an excellent overview of some of the related federal requirements for licensees compounding under the provisions of 503A. For licensees to compound in compliance with California requirements, they must ensure compliance with these federal requirements. I would strongly recommend and encourage licensees to review the presentation slides and overview Ms. Smiley provided at our committee meeting. It will serve as an excellent reminder of the federal requirements. We will start today with our proposed changes to Article 4.5 and the proposed revisions to Regulation Section 1735 through 1735.14 related to non-sterile preparations. This is a section on non-sterile preparations. Consistent with the USP chapter, and that's USP chapter 795, the proposed regulations mirror the structure of the USP chapter and include, and although it's in the materials, I'm going to read them for the record so that we would know what the sections are. So the section of the article is, the first one is 1735 compounding definition. Point 1 is introduction and scope. Point 2 is personnel training and evaluation. Point 3 is personnel hygiene and garbing. Point 4 is building and facilities. 1735.5 is cleaning and sanitization. Well, I'll say this correctly. Cleaning and sanitizing. Point 6, equipment and components. Point 7, master formulation and compounding records. 8, release inspections and testing. Point 9, labeling. 1735.10, establishing beyond use dates. Point 11, standard operating procedures. 12, quality assurance and quality control. Point 13, CNSP, packaging and transporting. And 1735.14, documentation. The proposed language is included in the meeting materials as attachment 2A. That's 2A. The comments are in attachment 2B. Comments received before and at the committee meeting were reviewed at the meeting and resulted in some changes to our original proposal. The proposed language today is a result of the input from staff and stakeholders. I have reviewed the additional comments and do not recommend any changes. However, I do want to specifically address several comments that were submitted both as a part of the committee meeting in advance of the meeting related to flavoring agents. As discussed during the committee meeting, Business and Professions Code 4126.8 explicitly states that compounding of drug preparations by a pharmacist shall be consistent with the standards established in the pharmacy compounding chapters of the current version of the USP, which is the United States Pharmacopoeia National Formulary, as specified. The board may adopt regulations to impose additional standards for compounding of drug preparations. In short, Section 4126.8 establishes USP as a minimum operating standard in California. There is nothing in this section that provides for the board with the authority to consider a lesser standard than what is established in the USP compounding chapters. I note that many of the comments received appear to be urging the board to adopt a lesser standard than what is established in USP. Such action would run contrary to the board's authority and would create a conflict with federal law. California cannot adopt a lesser standard than those established in USP. It appears, based on my reading of several of the comments submitted by consumers, that they believe that the board is taking action to prohibit the use of flavoring agents. I believe it is important to clarify that there is nothing in the board's proposed language that would prohibit the use of flavoring agents. The use of flavoring agents is allowed under both USP Compounding Chapter 795 as well as the board's proposed regulations under the requirements established. Pharmacies can continue adding flavoring agents as requested by patients. I'm going to say that again. Pharmacies can continue adding flavoring agents as requested by patients. Such pharmacies will need to meet the USP and board's requirements, the same as any other non-sterile compounding activity. A pharmacy may choose to no longer offer flavoring agents to consumers. However, that is a business decision made by the pharmacy. The board and USP are not prohibiting the use of flavoring agents. I also note that the committee determined, if appropriate, to additionally modify the language related to compounding in the preparation for veterinary patients. These changes are already reflected in section 1735.1E. That was a long introduction, and thank you for your patience while I provided those opening remarks and summary comments. I believe that the proposed language included in Article 4.5 for non-sterile compounding is appropriate and consistent with the legal requirements required under both 503A, California statute, and consistent with the board's consumer protection mandate. As I discussed earlier, I'd like to start first with my fellow committee members and hearing their discussion and comments before moving on to the full board and then to public comment. So committee members, any comments on 4.5 non-sterile compounding?
Hi, this is Trevor Chandler. I just wanted to preemptively for this and everything else, thank you for all the incredible work. This is incredibly thorough. So if I don't have any questions, it's only because this is so incredibly thorough. But I just wanted to put it out there that my silence is not that I didn't read it, but it's that it's all covered.
I appreciate that. There's a lot to read, isn't there? So committee members, hearing any other comments, let's open up to the full board. Any comments from the full board?
Maria, this is Jessie. I also want to thank you for being so thorough in this and also addressing the public comments. It's a lot of material, a lot of work. Having done non-sterile compounding in another state prior to moving to California, the concept of flavoring as a part of compounding was something that was standard even back then. And so it just makes sense. And I appreciate your taking time, making everything very clear. And you did a great job with the summary.
Thank you. Hey, moderator, I think we're ready for public comment.
We are now opening for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment on 14B. And our first comment comes from Lindsay. Hold on just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. All right, Lindsay, we've sent you a request to unmute your...
Thank you. Good morning. This is Lindsay Goldhorn with the California Community Pharmacy Coalition. First, just want to thank the Enforcement and Compounding Committee for all of your work on this super complex issue over the past several years. I want to recognize that. I am commenting today with respect to the non-sterile compounding flavoring issue. Our biggest concern is the proposed change, as has been noted, to the definition of compounding, which no longer explicitly excludes flavoring. And I respect and understand Board Member Serpa's comments and the board's stance that it has to adhere to at least USP standards pursuant to AB 973. Given how important it is for pharmacists to be able to add flavoring to children's medications in particular, if the board can't reconsider this stance, we would urge you to perhaps examine other ways to ensure flavoring can continue and not be considered compounding. When prescribing many common liquid medications to children, prescribers often don't take into consideration the flavor of the medicine, and this is where pharmacies come into play. They're able to add flavoring to liquids and suspension, which improves taste and increases medication adherence. And over the past decade, millions of children's medications have been flavored in California pharmacies with no negative outcomes. So if the flavoring exception is removed, most California pharmacies will stop offering it, which could result in children refusing their medications or parents coming up with their own possibly dangerous approaches to get their kids to take the medicine. So again, if the flavoring exclusion goes away, I think pharmacies are highly unlikely to continue to add flavoring agents just because of the new requirements they'll have to adhere to. So again, appreciate all the work the committee and the board has done on this. And if the exclusion cannot be maintained, we would encourage the board to examine alternative ways to ensure pharmacies can continue to offer flavoring. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will have Ned followed by caller 9. Ned, stand by. I will send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Good morning once again. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you on the important issue of excluding flavorings from compounding. First of all, I'd like to take a moment to thank all the board members in California for protecting the health and safety of California families and residents. Your job is not easy, and oftentimes you have to decide if you're going to stand up for what is in the best interest of Californians. My name is Ned Milankovich, and I am an attorney before you on behalf of Flavor RX today to implore you to exclude flavorings from the definition of compounding when you adopt USP 795. I'm not only an attorney like yourselves, I'm a licensed pharmacist, and also like yourselves, I sat on a board of pharmacy in Illinois for nearly a decade. And while I'm here in my capacity on behalf of Flavor RX, I'm also a dad of 4, and I'd like to take the liberty to speak on behalf of the parents and the children in the state of California. You've been told that moving flavorings into the definition of compounding doesn't make flavorings illegal. That is absolutely true, but it makes flavoring at the local pharmacy impossible unless onerous, costly changes take place. The translation is that children won't get their meds flavored, they won't take them, and the public will be harmed. You've also been told by certain people on the board that your hands are tied and you must include flavorings in the definition of compounding because you cannot adopt the lesser standard. This is simply false. And I'll tell you why, but I only have 3 minutes to talk, so please review your meeting materials where my letter is included for your review. If you haven't reviewed it, you should do so before you take flavorings away from the very people you were appointed to protect. California families, and in particular, California children who do not have a voice to come before you in the Board of Pharmacy. 4126.8 requires the compounding of drug preparations follow standards that are consistent with standards established in USP. That means when a pharmacy compounds drugs, it must comply with the procedures and requirements set forth in USP 795. However, 4126.8 does not define compounding. In fact, there's no provision of the pharmacy law in California that defines that term. It does not even adopt or incorporate USP Chapter 795 in its entirety, but rather only the requirement that compounding follow its procedures. The legislature has left intact the board's authority to define compounding in its rules, just as the legislature has vested the board with the power to adopt rules that define any other term not expressly defined in the pharmacy law. So you, the board members, can exclude pharmacy from the definition by rule if you choose to do so, as you have done for years. And no action needs to take place by the legislature to impede you. I implore you to exclude flavorings from compounding. It's safe, it's effective, and it will only enhance adherence and compliance for Californians. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have caller 9, followed by caller 14. Bear with us just a moment, caller 9. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 in order to unmute. All right, caller 9, I saw you try. Let's try again. *6 may be the prompt that you need to unmute. All right, caller 9, we're going to grab caller 14, and we'll circle back to you. And caller 14 just dropped. Next, we have Kathy. Bear with us just a moment, Kathy. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. All right, Kathy, we've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me? Thank you so much
Yes,
for
go ahead,
your
please.
time, and thank you for having us here today, and I appreciate the moment. I'll make it very, very quick. Please exclude flavoring and compounding. Children are generally more sensitive to sweet and bitter flavors than adults, An additional 10% of kids have elevated taste receptors. If this pushes through, it will be harming children instead of helping. Please stop and think about the families and the children, and most importantly, will break the kids in the hospital. When you're giving them medicine, the last thing they want is a bitter taste, or families coming home with medicine that has a bitter flavoring, and you don't want to start a ripple effect of parents trying to add flavoring to their kids' medicine. It's just safer to get it from the pharmacy, knowing that it comes intact and we're giving our children what they need. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to circle back to caller 9 first. Caller 9, you may need to dial *6 in order to unmute. And caller 9.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry about that. My name is Mario Sanchez from Los Angeles, and please don't make things more difficult for parents, especially those of us living in more rural areas where there's less compound pharmacy choices. The board hasn't mentioned anything, or I haven't heard anything yet about dangers of flavored medicine, or if there have been any problems. So why make the change? Why make it more difficult for parents, especially those of us caring for young ones who it's hard enough to have them, to take care of them when they're sick. It's hard enough for us to have them take their full medication. We're just trying to make them better, try to make sure they're safe. And why make this change? Thank you.
Thank you, caller 9. Next, we're going to have caller 14. Caller 14, we're sending you a request to unmute. You may need to dial *6. All right, caller 14, I see you've unmuted.
Hi, good morning. How are you? Hi, my name is Tamika, and I'm a mom of 5, and I just wanted to call in to say that I oppose in making it more difficult for parents like me to get medicine for my kids. I strongly oppose this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the list, we have caller 16. Caller 16, we're going to send you a request to unmute. Please dial *6 if necessary.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Parenting a sick child is challenging enough. Please don't make it more difficult by limiting our options of flavoring medicine for our children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, caller 16. Next, we have caller 17 followed by Chad. Hold on, caller 17. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Good morning. This is Van Allen in Modesto, and I would also just echo what everybody else has said. My kids are a little bit older, but I remember having to wrestle my boys to get the medicine in, and we had to put it on whipped cream and all. I mean, it just was a nightmare. And so if this is not a problem from a health perspective, which as somebody else said, it appears like it isn't, it just seems like there has to be a workaround. It's just such an obvious thing to make sure we're able to preserve and that other parents. I don't know if I'm being heard, or I was just interrupted by another message on the phone. So, but anyway, that's all I have to say. Just echo what everybody else said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Chad followed by caller 15.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, please.
Hey, good morning. My name is Chad Baker. I work for FlavorX. We supply pharmacies in California and pharmacies all across the country, really, with flavoring systems to improve palatability of children's medications. I'm not going to repeat what others have said, but I do want to provide the board, first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I do want to provide the board with some context on the real world impact of the decision that's before you today and repealing the existing flavoring carve-out provision. Today, the Washington Board of Pharmacy is the only state board of pharmacy that treats flavoring of commercially prepared medications like compounding, and they strictly enforce those standards upon their pharmacies. California and all other boards currently do not. Washington began enforcing this policy in 2019. Prior to this, hundreds of pharmacies in Washington state were flavoring children's medications every day. Now there may be a handful, if any. It's important to note that flavoring in Washington is not illegal, but because it is treated like compounding, most pharmacies no longer offer the service. And this is prior to all the new regulatory requirements that will be placed on pharmacies. On the flip side of this, the Arizona Board of Pharmacy used to treat flavoring of children's medications like compounding. It wasn't illegal to flavor in Arizona either, but there were compounding requirements in place, the most onerous of which was the need to get a doctor's prescription to flavor. Because of this, close to no pharmacies in Arizona were flavoring children's medications. About 10 years ago, the Arizona Board of Pharmacy changed their policy to allow for flavoring with certain guardrails in place without it being treated like compounding. Now, flavoring is widely available in Arizona and performed regularly in non-compounding pharmacies. What I hope is very apparent to the board from these two case studies is that while flavoring might not be illegal, when it is treated like compounding, it becomes impossible to do. I understand that there's a case to be made that it's a business decision for the pharmacy, but the pharmacy made a business decision based on the current regulations that are in place, and that was a decision to enhance palatability of children's medications and improve children's health. So I implore the board to keep the existing policy in place.
Thank you.
Next, we have caller 15, followed by caller 4. Hold on, caller 15. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 in order to unmute.
Hi, my name is Miriam Mora. I'm a resident of Sacramento, and I'm calling to ask opposing the making it more difficult for parents to get flavor medicine for children. I have 2 children, and I'm a single mom. And as it is, it's already difficult to get my. Can you hear me? I got a prompt.
Yes, go ahead, please. Please continue.
Oh, okay. So yes, Miriam Mora, resident of Sacramento. I oppose the excluding flavoring from children's medicine. As a single mother of 2 children, it's already very difficult to get my children to take medicine. And this would make it even more difficult during a time that's already challenging enough as the sole caregiver. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, next we have caller 4, and then I'm going to read a written comment. And caller 4, your hand just lowered. Please raise your hand by dialing *3 if you wish to speak. In time, I'm going to read a written comment that we have from Christy.
Moderator?
Ledesma.
Moderator,
Yes.
this is Maria. Can you preface the written comment as to why you're reading it because of a technology issue? Because typically we don't take written comments. So if you could just preface the why. She's not able to verbally speak. Is that correct?
Yes, there was a person who asked if they could write their comment, and I told them they could.
Noreen and Eileen, is that appropriate?
Going forward, no, we generally don't like to use the Q&A for the written comments. We want it on the record, but if this person, I think it's Christy, may be the one, if she is unable to call in for some technological reason, the board could decide to make an exception and read it in, but it's not generally something that we do. We don't want the Q&A feature to be used as outside of the record. We want it on the record orally, if possible.
Understood. Going forward, we will not be taking written comment through the Q&A.
maybe we should give Christy a chance to verbally, or if she's unable to, then it's okay to read it if there's some technology issue for her.
All right, there is a hand up from Christy. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. Christy, we see you've unmuted. Are you able to verbally communicate with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry, English is not my first language, but hi, I'm Christy, and my daughter has difficulty in swallowing pills, and usually her pediatrician would prescribe liquid medication. She has sensory issues, and she's in OT, occupational therapy, to help her try food with different tastes and textures, and that also includes liquids. So we do rely heavily on flavoring to help her take the medication easily. And since it's a business decision for most pharmacies not to use flavoring, so it would be a great disadvantage to my child. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mel. Mel, stand by. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hello.
Hello, go ahead, please.
My name's Mel, and I'm from California. I just wanted to share that I would really appreciate if you don't limit our resources as parents to help our children, take these medicines. And it's just been so helpful. And I just feel like if it's taken away, it's going to be that much more difficult for me as a parent. And I just wanted to speak on that. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to circle back to caller 4, followed by caller 18. Caller 4, we're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 in order to unmute.
Hi, my name is Jean Drexler, and I've been a pharmacist for 30 years. I was listening on the call about another issue, but I wanted to just tell you that, we used to use FlavorRx at our store, and I really liked it. I thought it was fun and easy. We had this little cookbook, and you add so many drops to make each flavor, and the kids loved it, and it increased sales. I thought it was a good service. And, I used to do compounding in school, and unless you can really say that it affects the quality or the stability or the expiration date of the medication, I don't know why it would be considered compounding. And I have 2 autistic kids, and flavor is really an important issue. So I'm not sure. I just think it should be allowed. I think FlavorRx was a great thing.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to have caller 18. Bear with us just a second. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 in order to unmute.
Hi, this is Marie Cotman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the board and make a comment today. As Dr. Serpa had referenced in her introduction, the rulemaking process for compounding has been a very long and arduous process over many, many years. I have long advocated that we do not adopt USP in its entirety because it is a written standard, not a written regulation. But with the comments that you're hearing today from all of these interested parties, you can see that how a blanket adoption of another body's standards limits our board's ability to meet the unique needs of our patient population. I do fully understand that we have this law in the books and it can't be changed today, but I hope that you as the board will recognize that the complications of abdicating our rulemaking process to other expert bodies that we have no influence over. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, and we're going to take one last look, but that should be all the requests at the moment. Seeing no further requests, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to everyone who provided public comment here. I can see that this is, or we have seen throughout the time of we've been reviewing this issue, that this is a highly complex issue that was not new to us, and we've been talking about this change that's coming up for many years. I can see that there's an opportunity here to provide more information, or maybe an FAQ to pharmacies to encourage them to not stop adding flavoring. They certainly can, and it's within their legal opportunities to provide flavoring. The patients and their families are demanding it, and it seems like that would be something that we could help to encourage. But what we have on our discussion today are our regulations for compounding that include adding flavoring as being a compounded process. Members, do you have any comments or questions based on the public comment, or shall we move on to the next item?
Maria, it's Jessie. I do have a few comments. I know one of the public comments suggested that non-compounding pharmacies would not be able to add flavoring. That's not my understanding. Can we just clarify that point? I don't know if you know the answer. Maybe that's a question for Eileen.
It's something that I perhaps could answer, but I think we should go to Supervising Inspector Acosta that could address that. Could a pharmacy solely provide flavoring and not be a full advertised compounding pharmacy? Supervising Inspector Acosta, I think you're on the panel.
Hi, I'm here. So there is no required licensure or anything on our end for any pharmacy to do non-sterile compounding. So any pharmacy that has a license with us is allowed to do compounding. So all they would have to do is follow the requirements.
Perfect, thank you. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure we had that on the record. I want to echo what Maria is saying in that, you know, flavoring and adding flavoring, and having done it specifically for my patient population, which was a children's hospital, it is a very simple form of compounding. The documentation is pretty easy, and so I really encourage pharmacies to continue providing that service. All it means is that you just need to make sure that you're documenting everything appropriately, which is also essential because when you are adding flavoring, it does change the amount of distilled water you have to add to make sure that the final concentration is the same. So I know there were a lot of comments asking about how that affects medication. Without that sort of documentation and without considering it compounding, we may not know what manipulation was done in order to prepare that product. So that's part of the reason why I think it's really essential to make sure that we are in line with USP standards on that. I just wanted to add that final note in there.
Thank you. Members, any other comments based on public comment, or we'll go ahead and move on to sterile compounding? Okay. Let's move on to proposed Article 4.6 and relating to sterile compounding. The proposed regulation sections include the following, and again, I'm going to read the sections for the record. They are detailed in the meeting materials. 1736 is sterile compounding definitions. Point 1, introduction and scope. Point 2, personnel training and evaluation. Point 3, personnel hygiene and garbing. Point 4, facility and engineering controls. 1736.5, certification and recertification. Point 6, microbiological air and surface monitoring. Point 7, cleaning, disinfecting, and applying sporicidal disinfectants and sterile 70% IPA. Point 8, introducing items into the SEC and PEC. Point 9, equipment, supplies, components. 1736.10, sterilization and depyrogenation. Point 11, master formulation and compounding records. Point 12, release inspections and testing. Point 13, labeling. Point 14, establishing beyond use dates. 1736.15, use of conventionally manufactured products as components. Point 16, use of CSPs as components. Point 17, standard operating procedures. Point 18, quality assurance and quality controls. Point 19, CSP handling, storage, packaging, shipping, and transport. 1736.20, documentation. Point 21, compounding allergenic extracts. As you can see, there are quite a few sections because this includes sterile compounding, which is a higher risk process. Given the significant risk to patients, the requirements for sterile compounding are more robust than those for non-sterile compounding. The proposed language is included in section 2C, like in CAT 2C, and the comments are in attachment 2D. Comments received before and at the committee meeting were reviewed and resulted in some changes to the original proposal language. The language proposed today is the result from input from staff and stakeholders. I noted that one set of comments from Cedars-Sinai was inadvertently included into the attachment 2B. I apologize for the misfiled letter. So it is one comment letter was misfiled in the meeting materials. I've reviewed all the comments and believe one further change in the proposed language is appropriate. I will highlight that change as I proceed. First, I'd like to highlight a few items specifically. The proposed language
I cannot hear Chair Serpa anymore. Is it just me?
No, I
Sorry
cannot.
about that. I'll start over at that point. My computer put me on mute. Maybe it doesn't like me talking so much. So did you hear me talk about the proposed change that I will bring up in the near future, in the next few minutes? So I'll go on to, first I'd like to highlight a few items specifically. The proposed language provides clear requirements specifically related to a certificate of analysis, a COA. The provisions related to the certificate of analysis are a good example of the collaboration between the committee and stakeholders' public comment. The language presented today incorporates changes made during the committee meeting to address public comment we received. In addition, as proposed in 1736.2b, the language would allow for the aseptic qualifications from one premises to be used for another premises under specified conditions. This is a big change from the board's current regulation requirements and provides better flexibility to licensees. Next, as proposed in 1736.4, the board will begin stepping into a future requirement for the use of interlocking pass-through drawers and allows some entities time to become fully compliant. Also, in response to comments recently received, I suggest that it may be appropriate for us to make one further change. And the second sentence of 1736.4E. And so that's one of the recommendations I'm making in addition to what you have in the meeting materials, is that we would remove the language that says no passive ceiling or wall penetrations are allowed. This could be added to the final motion at the end of my presentation here today. Lastly, I would like to highlight the provisions related to active pharmaceutical ingredients, also referred to as API. In the proposed section 1736.9, you will note that the language of the section requires a certificate of analysis that includes the grade of the material unless the component is used as a commercially available drug product. Requiring the COA to include the grade of the material will ensure licensees have an understanding of the quality of the component and its intended use. This is also consistent with the requirements established in USP Chapter 1080 for the use of excipients. Thank you for listening for my little introduction there on sterile compounding. So I'd like to open up to fellow committee members. Do you have any comments on 1736 regarding sterile compounding before we talk to the rest of the board? Committee members? Board members, any comments on sterile compounding? Okay, I think, moderator, we're ready for public comment. And just to remind everyone, this is on Article 4.6, sterile compounding. We're ready for public comment.
We are once again open for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. And our first request comes from Christy Ledesma. Hold on, Christy. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Sorry, I didn't ask a question. I don't know how that went in.
No problem.
All right. Next, we have Marie Cotman. Hold on just a moment, Marie. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you so much for entertaining our comments. With regards to Section 1736 as presented today, it does provide our licensees much clarification on which USP standards the board wishes to enforce as requirements rather than just best practices. I also appreciate the committee did collaborate with the public comments in several cases. Dr. Serpa, I very much appreciate your recent comments here regarding considering an amendment to the proposed 1736.4E regarding the passive penetrations. However, there are still several proposed requirements in 1736 that will unduly increase the costs of both compliance and, frankly, the compounded medication preparations without clear and obvious improvements to quality and/or safety of the compounded preparations. These costs will be passed on to the consumer, and ultimately accessibility to compounded preparations will be reduced, either because they can't afford it, or if the board overregulates the sterile compounding industry and makes compliance onerous, conscientious compounders will eventually drop out of the field, resulting in further reduction of the availability of compounded preparations. Ultimately, our California patients will still need sterile compounded preparations, but they will seek out economical solutions from outside of California and outside of your licensee's service areas. Hope you will consider these remarks as you decide on whether to vote on moving these forward later today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have John Gray. Bear with us just a moment, John. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 in order to unmute.
Hi, good morning. This is John Gray. I'm a registered pharmacist with Kaiser Permanente. Thanks for the opportunity to provide comments on the sterile compounding portion of the proposed regulations. First, I want to thank the Enforcement and Compounding Committee for the collaborative process that it employed in reviewing these draft regulations. I also want to thank the committee for taking our feedback on a handful of provisions in the proposed regulations, specifically Section 1736.1D on restrictions on when a product should not be compounded. We do have several remaining areas of concern with the proposed regulation. The underlying concern for most of those remaining provisions is the lack of accompanying evidence to support the need for a regulation that exceeds the requirement of the chapter. The committee's stated approach for developing these proposed regulations is to only impose additional requirements that are necessary for public safety. However, the committee has done very little to establish that these additional requirements are actually necessary. Specifically, we would expect a claim that a regulation is necessary to be supported by empirical data. However, such data have not been presented in a public forum. Furthermore, one instance of bad behavior in one pharmacy that is observed by an inspector is not empirical data. It's an anecdote or case report. It is particularly important that the committee do more to establish the necessity of these requirements because many of the proposed regulations, particularly those related to the physical plant, could be very expensive and very onerous to meet. Our overarching position is that where the committee is proposing to impose regulations that exceed those of the chapter, the committee should show its work and present empirical data to demonstrate that the regulation is truly necessary to protect the public. Some of the specific areas of this proposed regulation that we believe should be deleted and revert to the chapter if there is no evidence to support it are Section 1736.1B on the conditions under which a CSP can be compounded with an immediate use BUD, 1736.6B on the requirement to identify microorganisms to at least the genus level when action levels are not exceeded, 1736.9D on the requirement to evaluate certificates of analysis for components that have been obtained from FDA-registered facilities. Under the chapter, a facility would be required to receive but not necessarily evaluate a COA. And 1736.12b and 1736.17a on the incorporation by reference of several additional USP chapters. We believe that where compliance with elements from other USP chapters is deemed necessary by the board and the committee, then those specific elements ought to be called out in the regulation rather than simply incorporating by reference an entire chapter. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide our comments.
Thank you.
We're going to take one last look for requests for comment. And I believe those are all the requests for public comment we have at the moment. Would you like to return to the agenda?
Thank you. Members, hearing public comment, do you have any further comments on sterile compounding? Okay, let's move on to the next article, 4.7. Proposed article 4.7 relates to handling of hazardous drugs. As a reminder, USP 800 handling of hazardous drugs was published in 2019 and has not changed. It is not compendial until USP 797 regarding sterile compounding is compendial because they're interrelated. The proposed regulation sections are 18 of them, and I'm going to read them into the record. Thank you for your patience. 1737, handling of hazardous drugs. Point 1, introduction and scope. Point 2, list of hazardous drugs. Point 3, types of exposure. Point 4, responsibilities of personnel handling hazardous drugs. 1737.5, facilities and engineering controls. Point 6, environmental quality and control. Point 7, personal protective equipment, PPE. Point 8, hazard communication program. Point 9, personnel training. 1737.10, receiving. Point 11, labeling, packaging, transport, and disposal. Point 12, dispensing final dosage form. Point 13, compounding. Point 14, administering. Point 15, deactivation, decontamination, cleaning, and disinfecting. 1737.16, spill control. 17, documentation and standard operating procedures. Point 18, medical surveillance. Members, the language and comments received are attachment 2E and 2F. Comments received before and at the committee meeting were reviewed and resulted in some changes to the original proposed language. The language proposed today is a result of input from staff and stakeholders. I believe the language is appropriate. Before we go to public comment, I'd like to open comment to my fellow committee members first on 1738, Article 4.7, hazardous drugs. Committee members, do you have any comments?
Hi, Chair Serpa.
Hello, Dr. O, President O.
Thank you. Just would like to request our staff, Christine. I know this is mainly related to compounding, but it would be very helpful. There are obviously thousands of regular retail community pharmacies out there. This chapter is relevant to them in ways, and I would like to also understand if any applicability of this chapter, adoption of this chapter, how that would affect possibly just the regular community pharmacies who are not compounding. That may be a good information for us to have, just to clarify if there's anything that they would need to do. So just my suggestion. And if Christine has any insight into that, she is more than welcome to speak, but not putting her on the spot if she's not ready.
If I understand your question, you'd like me to kind of explain a little bit how this chapter, how USP 800 and what are we putting in 17 38 will affect a regular retail store that may not do compounding? Is that your request?
Yes, Christine. Yeah.
Okay, so in general, USP 800 is the handling of hazardous drugs. So it doesn't necessarily just encompass compounding, as you stated. So it depends on what the pharmacy is actually trying to do. There are many hazardous drugs that would come in and out of a retail pharmacy. Most of the requirements in USP are related to the handling of API or anti-neoplastic. So those two categories of drugs. Most retail pharmacies won't physically touch an API, so the raw material or the powder that may be used in compounding, so that probably won't affect most of them. Most of them may handle an anti-neoplastic tablet or even a 5-FU cream, which is an anti-neoplastic agent on table 1. So I would highly encourage pharmacies to read the chapter. There is a lot of ways to do what's called an assessment of risk, and that assessment of risk will help you define how you are going to handle that particular product. But it will affect retail stores. It may just be to the effect of you need to have a policy and you need to outline what your hazardous drugs are and what your assessment of risk is to determine how it will be handled. Is that what you're looking for, President Now?
That is very helpful. And I think with that, it would be great for us to probably produce a FAQ document if this regulation we are passing today, if that would affect that. Because I know we don't even have anything about this in self-assessment, even though USP 800 has been in place since 2019, right? So we're adding this regulation now into the books. And if we are doing so, it would be very important for us to clarify if we're going to be looking for anything during the inspection process and to make sure our community pharmacies are aware of any additional requirement that may come about to them, because this will catch a lot of them by surprise. So I'm just putting it out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as with any new regulations, part of what the inspectors do when they're doing inspections as regulations are going through the regulatory process is they start those communications with licensees to help prepare them so that they are aware of upcoming regulations too. But an FAQ would be a wonderful resource. Members, any other comments or questions on hazardous drugs? Okay, moderator, I think we're ready for public comment on Article 4.7, hazardous drugs.
We are once again open for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. And our first request comes from John Gray. Hold on, John. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 in order to unmute.
Thank you. Hi, this is John Gray again, registered pharmacist with Kaiser Permanente. I won't kind of restate all of what I said previously. We do again want, but I do want to restate our thanks for the collaborative process in reviewing the draft regulations. And I also again want to thank the committee for taking our feedback on a handful again of suggestions that we made during the last meeting, specifically on 1737.5A on the storage of HDs for non-sterile compounding in the sterile compounding suite, 1737.7A on the requirement around labeling of ASTM D6978 gloves, and 1737.8E on the development of an organization's hazard communication plan. But we do have, again, several areas of remaining concern with the proposed regulation. And again, as with 797, the sterile compounding regulations, the underlying concern for most of them is related to a lack of accompanying evidence to support the need for the regulation that exceeds the requirements of the chapter. Specifically, we want to call out our concerns around 1737.5D on the prohibition on having a pass-through from a containment SEC to an unclassified space, on 1737.7C on the requirement to change outer gloves and 1737.13A and the preparation mat between each drug compounded. So again, those two coupled together would require compounders to change both their outer gloves and the preparation mat between each drug that is being compounded, each type of drug that is being compounded. Again, we're unaware of any evidence to support that those two provisions of regulation, and we are very concerned about the additional waste that this will result in the waste stream. Just very, very concerned about the addition to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, that the amount of glove wrappers and prep mat wrappers that we'll be producing will cause. And then lastly, want to call out 1737.13B on the requirement to handle only one drug in the PEC at a time. Again, looking forward to continued engagement on this and having the opportunity to provide written comment in the not too distant future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Melanie Horn, followed by Marie Kottman. Hold on, Melanie. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Board members, thank you so much for the opportunity to comment. My name is Melanie Horn. I am commenting on behalf of Sutter Health. I also want to thank the Enforcement Committee for their collaboration in developing and getting feedback to the proposed regulations for the Board of Pharmacy's enforcement and taking the suggestions, specifically those ones that were mentioned by Dr. Gray, were very helpful. I also just want to comment that I have very similar concerns that Dr. Gray has mentioned. With the addition, I mimic all of his sentiments in regards to 1735.5D with the segregated containment segregating compounding area to the unclassified space. Specifically, one additional factor that has not been mentioned is that an allowable CSEC is considered also an SCA, which has a door that opens to unclassified space. So therefore, a pass-through can help to facilitate movement of those drugs without having to open and close that larger door, which would be a larger contaminating event. In addition, the requirements around 1737C with changing outer gloves, if they were to be changed every 30 minutes between each CSP or type of HD, does not seem reasonable for operational efficiencies when those gloves could be decontaminated in other methods, such as wiping to remove HC residue, which is a validated process and is outlined in discussion in USP 800 standards. One additional concern that was brought up in the Enforcement Committee is in reference to the type of respirator listed in 1737.E as being only a full face cartridge respirator or a PAPR. If the respirator needs to be specified, it should be a respirator that's allowable based on the type of exposure, which OSHA does allow. So something like a particulate respirator for particulates or powders should be an allowable respirator selection and should not be restricted only to a vapor type respirator for purposes such as cleaning our primary engineering controls if we do not have any vapor medications that are being compounded in those CPECs. Additionally, I just also want to mimic the concern over the placement mat being changed each time. And we look forward to ongoing collaboration to develop the language. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Marie Kottman. Hold on just a moment. We are sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you again for the opportunity to comment. Again, Section 1737 as presented today does provide licensees with clarification on which USP standards that the board wishes to enforce as requirements rather than best practices. I would like to echo that I also appreciate the collaboration that has occurred on this section as well as the other sections relative to compounding. Further, without repeating what you've already heard from Dr. Gray and Dr. Horn, I echo their sentiments. They have more eloquently stated these, but I do want to highlight Dr. Gray's comments regarding the lack of evidence to support some of these additional requirements. They've commented on most of the sections to which I would have had comments on, so I will not repeat that either. But I do want to say that I agree with them. I will add in section 1737.10 with regards to receiving. I do appreciate that you tried to collaborate with us on this. The wording has changed since the committee meeting. However, it still says that all anti-neoplastics and HDs shall be shipped and received from the supplier in a segregated impervious plastic bulk, etc. I have no control as a receiver as to how the shipper sends it. So if it comes and it's not in the impervious plastic, what am I to do? Return it, take it in anyways, clean it off? It's just very difficult as a licensee to comply, and I am one who likes to comply with rules that I don't have control over how it comes to me. I do hope that you'll consider that in your approval of these measures today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that appears to be all of our requests for comment at the moment. Do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Members, hearing public comment on hazardous drugs, do you have any further comments?
Sherpa, I know that it's a little bit of an awkward time, but we are probably 10:21, so hopefully we probably need to take a break soon.
Thank you. We could take a break before radiopharmaceuticals. That would work out well if you wanted to do that now. If there are no other comments on hazardous drugs. Okay. President O, I turn it back to you for the break.
Sounds good. We will take a break for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10:30, everyone. See you in 10 minutes, 10:30. Okay, it's 10:30. Hopefully everyone is back. I'll take a quick roll call and hand it back to Chair Serpa. Maria, are you back?
Here.
Hi, Maria. Renee?
Present.
Hi, Renee. Trevor?
Here.
Thank you. Jesse?
Here.
Thank you, Jose.
Present.
Thank you, KK. KK? Maybe not back yet. Ricardo? You back, Ricardo?
Yeah, I'm here on the video.
Oh,
I
thank
see
you,
you.
Ricardo.
I was waving. Hello. You and Maria.
KK, are you back? KK is probably taking a little longer, but Maria, we have a quorum if you want to get back on it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
The last article to review is proposed Article 4.8 related to radiopharmaceuticals. The proposed regulation sections include, and again, pardon me as I read it in for the record, 1738 radiopharmaceuticals, preparation, compounding, dispensing, and repackaging. Point 1, introduction. Point 2, radiation safety considerations. Point 3, immediate use of sterile radiopharmaceuticals. Point 4, personnel, qualifications, training, and hygiene. 1738.5, facilities and engineering controls. Point 6, microbiological air and surface monitoring. Point 7, cleaning and disinfecting. Point 8, assigning BUD. Point 9, documentation. 1738.10, preparation. Point 11, compounding. Point 12, dispensing. Point 13, repackaging. Point 14, quality assurance and quality control. I believe that the language that we have presented in the meeting materials is consistent and appropriate with the board's consumer protection mandate. I'd like to open up any comments to committee members first. And then members of the full board, do you have any comments on Article 4.7 regarding radiopharmaceuticals? Oh, excuse me, 4.8 radiopharmaceuticals. Okay, I think we're ready for public comment. Moderator, this public comment is for section 4.8 radiopharmaceuticals.
We are now accepting public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Please do. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and understanding as we went through these very complex articles regarding compounding. Unless there are any further comments, there appears to be a consensus on the proposed language as appropriate to move forward with a possible motion to begin the formal rulemaking process. Moving forward with the action today is important to provide clarity to licensees as USP chapters become compendial on November 1st, 2023. I note that there is a possible motion that you can see on the slide there. I can also read that into the record, but if someone wanted to make the motion or to have any further discussion, note that the highlighted section where it says insert any additional changes I identified, I am suggesting that we insert the language is that we would remove from 1736.4E, remove the comment or the phrase, the section that says no passive ceiling or wall penetrations are allowed. For the bold section, that would be an additional to the posted motion. Members, do you have any comments on the 4 sections and moving forward to rulemaking? And I would entertain a motion.
Sure, I think it would be more than appropriate for you to make the motion for all the work you've done. I think it would be great if you are okay to do so.
Thank you. I will, unless there's any further comment from board members.
I was going to say, I'll second it, Maria. This Ricardo.
Okay. I'll read the tiny little words on the screen. Approve the proposed regulatory text as proposed to amend Article 4.5 related to non-sterile compounding and the regulation language as proposed. Add Article 4.6 related to sterile compounding and the text as proposed. Add Article 4.7 related to hazardous drugs and the regulation text as proposed. And add Article 4.8 related to radiopharmaceuticals and the regulation text as proposed. Further, repeal Article 7 related to sterile compounding and repeal sections 17.8.3, 1708.3, 1708.4, and 1708.5 related to radioactive drugs. In addition, remove from the proposed text of 1736.4E, no passive ceiling or wall penetrations are allowed. Further, direct staff to submit the text to the Director of Department of Consumer Affairs and to the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process. Also, authorize the enforcement committee chair and executive officer to make any non-substantive changes or clarifying language or clarifying changes necessary consistent with the board's policy. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all necessary steps to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations as noticed. That's the motion.
Good for me. I'll second it.
Dr. Serpa, this is Noreen Marks.
Noreen.
I would again just suggest that the reference instead of to adverse comments are comments to which the board must respond.
That is very good. We should change our boilerplate language. So it say, can you repeat that again? So the last sentence would read.
I cannot read the last sentence up there because the
okay.
translation is going over it, but I think it's with respect to no adverse comments, it would be just no comments to which the board must respond. Because there could be adverse comments that are not related and the board doesn't need to respond, or there could be comments that aren't considered adverse, but the board must still respond.
Thank you. So the last comment would be, if no comments are received, that the board must respond during the 45-day comment period. That would be the amended motion, President O.
Thank you, Chair Serpa.
So before, I just, because we still need public comment, so I just wanted to make sure that Member Sanchez was okay with that change.
Yes, I'm fine with the change.
One more step before we go to you, President O, sorry. Moderator, let's open the lines for comment on this motion for the entire package. I would also like to remind members of the public there will be many opportunities to provide comment on the proposed text through the rulemaking process, and appreciate your continued participation in this process. So we're ready for public comment.
We are once again open for public comment, this time on the motion. If you would like to comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And Marie Kottman, we see your request. Bear with us just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you again for the opportunity to comment to this board during the early stages of the rulemaking process. For those of you whom I don't know, I have been the owner and PIC at Pacific Compounding Pharmacy in Stockton for 17 years. I am also in the final stages of building a brand new sterile compounding laboratory, so I am familiar with the history of these regulations and the direction to which they are headed. As you've heard today, I have many thoughts, comments, and concerns about the proposed rules, most of which I have submitted to the committee for consideration. I will reiterate my appreciation of the effort and collaboration that the inspectors and the compounding committee have put into the proposed rules that are presented in over 450 pages of materials before you today. I agree with removing our existing compounding rules to replace and renumber them to be consistent with the USP chapters. However, I believe that rushing into rulemaking with more than 150 new regulations that go above and beyond the new USP compounding chapters would be a mistake. I believe we all have the same goal in mind, which is to provide high quality and effective compounded medications to Californians. Any rules or regulations promulgated by this board should serve to improve the quality and the safety of compounded processes with the rigor of scientific evidence to support their rationale for implementation. Further, new rules should not result in unnecessary compounding costs that will ultimately be passed on to the California consumers. I have long advocated against adopting USP guidelines as law because they're written as standards, not laws. The pain of this truth is evident in the many proposed rules before you today that simply codify the word shall in place of the word should from the USP text. I recognize that this allows inspectors to enforce the standards. However, if you had time to read the entire report, the proposed regulation is just not ready for publication. There are contradictory regulations regarding veterinary compounding for office use. The term integrity has two similar but different definitions. CETA guidelines from prior to the USP publication are referenced, and some proposed regulations lack obvious compelling reason or scientific evidence as to why they are necessary and how they will improve patient safety. Further, if the board implements rules that merely increase the cost of compounding without obvious benefits for patient safety, consumer prices will increase, which may result in the reduced availability of compounded preparations to the California public. Respectfully, though I agree with Dr. Serpa's adjustment today regarding the passive openings in the walls, I ask that you reject the motion in front of you and make an alternate motion to push these proposed regulations back to committee for further revisions with the guidance to only adopt regulations that have compelling evidence that they will improve patient safety or that they will clarify the new USP chapter standards. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
It appears, oh, I was about to say that's the only one, but we now have a new request from John Gray. Bear with us just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. All right, John, you may need to dial *6 in order to unmute.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is John Gray again, registered pharmacist with Kaiser Permanente. Just want to echo Dr. Kottman's kind of thesis of her statement, which is that we again urge the committee and the board to only move forward with adding additional regulations on top of the USP standards where there's compelling evidence to do so. And we would certainly be amenable and supportive to Dr. Kottman's proposal to send these proposed regulations back to committee to spend some more time evaluating the evidence that actually exists to support many of the proposed additions to the board's regulations on compounding. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide comment.
Thank you.
We're going to take one last look for a request for comments. We have a request from Meg Hogan. Bear with us. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
My name is Meg Hogan. I'm with Hartley Medical Center Pharmacy in Long Beach, California. We are an intrathecal compounder of medications for patients who have spasticity and pain problems. I just would like to reiterate the comments that Marie Kottman and John Gray made. I think that it would behoove the board to send the regulations back to the committee. There are many, many comments that have not yet been addressed, and there is no empirical evidence for some of the changes that have been made. I appreciate all the work that the committee has done, but I do think that there is more work to be done, and Hartley is extremely concerned about some of the changes in the sterile compounding regulations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we have a request from Chad Baker. Bear with us just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Again, I just want to clear something up, and I know we're not going to have a debate here, but there was a comment made in terms of the flavoring that the only requirement will be documentation, and I do not believe that is true. So that is something that needs to be discussed because it seems like it's far more than just documentation. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, we're going to scan for any last commenters. There appear to be no other requests for comment at the moment. Do you wish to return to the motion?
Please do. Thank you. And thank you, members and all members of the public who have provided comments. As I stated, this is the beginning of the rulemaking process, and there'll be ample opportunity at many junctures to provide comments on specific language in specific areas. But I believe it is important for us as a board to move forward with the rulemaking process to assist the regulated public, because November 1st, USP will become compendial. And at that point, our current regulations will be in conflict in many areas and provide confusion to the regulated public. So in the in trying to provide more clarity, I think we can continue to have these conversations during the regulatory hearing on some of the details, but I don't think we should pause in our process. And so would suggest that we continue with the motion. And board members, unless you have any comments, I'm ready to turn it over for President O to take a roll call vote.
Hey, Maria, this is Jessie. I do have just a question in regards to the conversation. So it's my understanding that most of these changes are to be compliant with the newest USP standards that will be released. Are there any additional regulations in here that would be stricter than that standard?
So that's very complex. I can tell you that our current regulations are stricter than what USP is proposing already too. So in some situations, our proposed language is to keep the same regulatory standard that we have in our current language in some situations. And in other situations, it's to provide clarity and to provide additional information. There's hundreds of different areas. It would be hard to kind of go through them all. But in I think in a global kind of statement, the importance is we're looking at our current regulations do not meet the standard and structure of USP, which becomes effective on November 1st, 2023. And so it's important that we mirror those standards and be closer to implementing our regulations by that date. Otherwise, it could be very complicated. As having conflicting and confusing regulations at the federal and state level. I'm probably saying that all incorrectly. Maybe Dr. Acosta could clarify kind of in a couple of global statements, Dr. Acosta, as to why we need to continue to move forward for November 1st.
So there are definitely standards in all four of the set of regs that are not in the current USP chapter. Many of them have been discussed, and that's a lot of the public comments that we have received. We would be jumping from where our current law is to where USP is, and in several instances, we would have a higher standard. One of those standards we talked about is the interlocking door for the HD stuff. And then some of the sterile things that would be a higher standard is we are still going to require the testing, the endotoxin testing to be made available and reviewed prior to the drug being released. That is current standard, but that is not USP standard. So there's the differentiation between where we are, where USP is going, and then where our law may have filled the gap or gone a little bit further. So there is definitely a whole gamut of different things going on. As far as moving these now versus waiting, we have, 45-day comment period. We have regulatory hearings to go through. Then if anything changes, we have another 15-day comment period. We will have ample opportunity to interact with those that have commented today. If we don't move forward, when the USP standard goes into effect or is enforceable on 11/1 of this year, our standard will have a few conflicts, which will be really hard for licensees to differentiate about which one they would want to comply with. Of course, the highest standard is always the one you want to comply with, but the ideal would be for us to transition about the same time where our new set of regs would then also be in effect at the same time that the new USP went into it. I hope that helps.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you both for that summary. That really helps.
So members, barring any other comments? I think
Hi, Maria, this is KK. First of all, thank you very much. It's a very large and thorough work. So I appreciate and congratulate the committee for that. With regards to a lot of public comments, I have a question regarding the flavoring part. If this will be considered compounding, will that also subject to potency testing as well for the compounded product, or will that be a carve out, or this is not going to be applicable here?
That's a very specific question on that article. I think Supervising Inspector Acosta, can you specifically answer that question?
So I think that question is coming up because in our current law, we have a quality assurance requirement that there is a compound, so 2 a year, have some type of quality assurance testing. That law is actually going to be part of the repeal package. So as far as the flavoring agents, it would have to comply with all of the requirements of USP and our 1735 chapter. I don't believe off the top of my head there is any requirement for a potency test necessarily to take place. I believe that will completely evolve out, but they will have to comply. There was a commenter that made a comment about it's just documentation. No, they have to completely comply. Training, cleaning, an appropriate area for those things to take place. So flavoring will have to mask all of those things. If that helps.
Thank you, appreciate it. I was thinking along the lines of what are other necessary competencies or steps a non-sterile compounding pharmacy will have to take if this is to be classified as such. So thank you. Appreciate that clarification.
Thank you. Any other further comments from committee members following the public comment? So, Eileen, I just want to be clear that we did have a couple of member comments after public comment. They were not all about the public comments. So do I have to open public comment again, or can we go to the vote?
I think we can go to the vote because the motion is not changed.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify for you, Mr. President, we're ready to take a roll call vote.
Thank you, Chair Sherpa. We'll go with you. Maria, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Renee, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Indira. Sorry, Trevor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Jesse, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Jose, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, KK, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Ricardo, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, and I vote yes. The motion passes. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for your patience during this long committee report. We have a few more agenda items on the Committee for Enforcement and Compounding. C, discussion and consideration of draft statutory proposal to amend Business and Professions Code 4081 and 4105. As a part of the committee's January meeting, we considered a recommendation from staff to amend Business and Professions Code sections 4081 and 4105 to address challenges staff are experiencing in obtaining records necessary to evaluate pharmacy operations for compliance with pharmacy law. At that time, we requested that staff prepare draft statutory language for our future consideration. Attachment 3 includes the draft language. During the meeting, members spoke in support of the language. In response to public comment, members spoke in support of also incorporating electronic records if appropriate. Including in the meeting materials and displayed on the slide is the committee's recommendation. Committee members, do you have any additional comments? Board members, do you have any comments on the committee's recommendation? Since this is a committee recommendation, we're ready for public comment.
We are now taking public comment on the recommendation. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And it looks like our first request comes from John Gray. Bear with us just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 in order to do so.
Thank you. This is John Gray again from Kaiser Permanente. Am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. So John Gray, registered pharmacist with Kaiser Permanente. I appreciate the note in the motion related to electronic record storage. We do encourage the board as it works to refine the statutory proposal language to consider whether it would be a benefit to specifically allow for records, regardless of the form in which they were made, to be maintained solely in electronic format. There's existing language in the pharmacy law, Business and Professions Code 4070C, around conditions that the board might want to specify to ensure that records are electronic records are maintained in a fashion that are unalterable and can be produced. Similarly, there are standards in California Evidence Code, Section 1550, that the board could look to. And the underlying reason for encouraging this is we think in the same way that the existing proposal, as it's written today, will help inspectors to do their job. We think that explicitly allowing for electronic record storage could help inspectors do their job. We have experience with electronic record storage systems that allow for rapid retrieval of records in a manner that they're stored in an inalterable manner. I can speak from experience and say that to retrieve a record from an electronic storage system is much faster and more efficient than to call back a record that has been sent to an offsite storage facility for those pharmacies that have an offsite storage waiver. So, again, we would just encourage the board as it moves forward with refining this language to consider if there's a way to kind of move record storage into the 21st century and allow for electronic record storage of those records that may have initially been made on paper. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide comment.
Thank you.
And we're going to take a look for any last opportunities for public comment. There are no other requests for public comments at the moment. Do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. And perhaps Eileen or Ann could provide some information. I know that we heard this comment during the committee meeting, and it was a little bit confusing because many of us thought that this was already covered, and in fact, it's written in 4105D1 about electronic records. So I'm not quite sure what the Dr. Gray's comment is about what's missing, and perhaps you can help us to see what's missing. I thought that this was already covered as electronic records are already allowed.
I'll jump in. I apologize, given the timing of this meeting and the Enforcement Committee meeting, I have not had an opportunity to confer with council to thoroughly evaluate the comments being provided by Kaiser and the state of the current law and offer a recommendation as to whether or not it's legally appropriate.
Thank you. I think that's perfectly fine and understandable. We've had quite a bit of material and many meetings over the last couple of weeks. Wasn't meant to put you on the spot. But I think it still is appropriate since this is a committee recommendation, and we heard that comment in the committee also, that we continue to move forward and potentially look at that clarification during the regulatory process. Sorry, this is for legislation, isn't that correct? Yes, for DP
Yes.
code, so it's not regulation. So I'm not quite sure what would be the recommendation going forward. Should we pause on this, or can we incorporate that comment in the future since this is legislative language we're proposing? Can I make a
So again,
maybe?
Yeah, I might be speaking out of turn, so I'm apologizing again in advance, but I do think that the committee recommendation provides the flexibility to incorporate the additional clarification specific to records, electronic records, if it's appropriate. We could, typically in these types of changes, the board's policy has been that staff work with the committee chair to just confirm the finalized language to ensure it's consistent with the board's policy.
Great, and thank you for that clarification. I do see it is on the committee's recommendation on the posted slide as to incorporate electronic records if appropriate. Thank you for the additional conversation on that. Mr. President, that is the committee's recommendation. I think we're ready for a vote.
Thank you, Chair Sherpa. Maria, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Renee.
Yes.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yes.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Jose.
Yes.
Thank you, KK.
Yes.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Yes.
Thank you, and I vote yes. The motion passes. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next agenda item D, discussion and consideration of proposed to amend Title 16 California Code of Regulations section relating to compounding of non-sterile and sterile preparations for dispensing by veterinarians for animal patients. Members, we already discussed this issue as a part of our discussion of non-sterile and sterile compounding regulations. We did include that information in the proposal before. We had additional discussion at additional committee meetings. So as that's been covered, I'll move on to the next agenda item. E, review and discussion of enforcement statistics. Members, the meeting materials included in attachment 5 include enforcement statistics. The board has initiated 2,686 investigations and closed 2,376 investigations. Outcomes have varied and include the issuance of 141 letters of admonishment, 766 citations, and referral of 181 cases to the AG's office. I want to highlight that last statistic. 181 cases have been referred to the AG's office. I believe that there is some misconception that the board's disciplinary activities with some that suggests that the board is always seeking to discipline licenses. The data tells us otherwise. The referrals to the AG's office are about 7.6%. I'd like to also highlight that the board secured 6 interim suspension orders and was granted 8 Penal Code 23 restrictions. In both instances, the board was successful in securing immediate public protection through these actions while the disciplinary case process continues. Such actions are core to our mandate. Please also note that the average days of investigations awaiting final closure is reported on the chart for April 1st, 2023 as 75 days. During the meeting, we noted that this number appeared to be inconsistent with the data. After the meeting, this number was recalculated to be 43 days. Thank you to staff who was quickly able to update this report. Investigation timeframes are also included. As I shared during the committee meeting, I'd like to thank the supervising inspectors who worked to reduce the supervisory review time. With 2 vacancies, it is commendable. We truly appreciate your efforts. Members, as a reminder, during our July meeting, we will receive a 3-year comparison data which will help us to review and evaluate these trends. Members, do you have any questions or comments on the enforcement statistics? I think we're ready for public comment.
We are now open for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue?
We'll go back to the meeting. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, members and public, for your patience during this long and detailed presentation reviewing the work of the Enforcement and Compounding Committee. President O, this concludes my report, and I turn the meeting back to you.
Thank you, Chair Serpa. Really appreciate all the work. All right, next, we're going to get to Licensing Committee report. I am pleased to provide a report on the Licensing Committee. Thank you to my fellow committee members, Chick Patel and D.R. Cameron Banks, Trevor Chandler, Jessica Crowley, and Jason Wise. As we did not have a quorum for our committee meeting, any action will require a motion. As there is one item where I believe action is appropriate, I will remind members at that time. First agenda is discussion and consideration of provisions for remote processing. To facilitate physical distancing early in the COVID-19 pandemic, the board approved a waiver to extend the provisions for remote processing. The waiver based on the board's authority in Business and Professions Code 4062 and is limited in duration. Members, the meeting materials contain extensive information on remote processing and the remote processing waiver that has been in effect for a majority of the pandemic. As we have discussed this issue several times, I'm not going to review it. What I do want to highlight is that we continue to receive comments suggesting that the board has changed its legal interpretation of remote processing. I do want to remind everyone present, this is not an accurate statement. As Ms. Smiley has repeatedly indicated, the board's interpretation of the law has not changed, as the board was never asked to issue an interpretation on these provisions before the issuance of the first waiver. The board's interpretation of the remote processing question arises from the structure of current permanent pharmacy law. During the committee meeting earlier this month, we considered several concepts that could be included in legislative proposal if the board ultimately determines that such action is appropriate. The concepts are detailed in the chair report along with summary of comments from members and the public. The committee has requested data from stakeholders regarding pharmacy personnel that are working remotely. I'd like to thank CVS for providing that information. I am hopeful that other stakeholders will similarly provide information as requested. Before I open up for all members, I wanted to ask committee member that was there, Jesse or Trevor, if they have any additional comments on this discussion.
Hi, Sung, it's Jesse. The only comment that I wanted to add, I think at some point we had also requested some information on how many pharmacies are actually benefiting from remote work in California. So I'm hoping that we get more information from that at some point.
Thank you, Jesse.
I have nothing further to add.
Thank you, Trevor. Members, any comments or questions? Seeing none. Moderator, please open the line for public comment.
We are now accepting public comment for item 15. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And it looks like we have a request from Sarah Polomu. Hold on just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
This is Sarah Polomu with the California Community Pharmacy Coalition. I want to note that we have requested feedback from our members on what types of remote work is currently being performed, how many pharmacists are currently working remotely, and how many of these are specialty versus community pharmacies. We hope to have that information to the board shortly. We request the board support a statutory fix to allow remote processing to continue beyond the waiver, and we are hopeful that a 90-day extension, as was discussed for inpatient settings yesterday, could also be extended to community pharmacy settings. As of May 28th, several of our members' pharmacists will lose their jobs. Our coalition would like to work with the board on a solution. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments.
Next, we have John Gray. Bear with us just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 in order to unmute.
Yes, thank you very much. This is John Gray. I'm a registered pharmacist with Kaiser Permanente. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide feedback on this important topic. First of all, I just want to say, we recognize this is an ongoing discussion, and there'll be some further refinement to the kind of very draft language that the committee discussed a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to keep most of my comments more general and then just flag a few things from the draft language for the benefit of the full board. First of all, we really appreciate the board's willingness to continue to engage on the topic of pharmacist remote work. Based on the number of passionate comments to the committee and the board in past meetings, it is clear that this is an important issue to many stakeholders in California. Based on our favorable experience with pharmacist and technician remote work during the public health emergency, we continue to believe that the current remote work processing waiver is the best available framework for the statutory changes that are needed to authorize remote prescription processing on a permanent basis. We believe that the more onerous and restrictive the requirements associated with pharmacy personnel remote work are, the less likely pharmacy organizations are to participate, and thereby reducing the benefit to consumers and the regulated public. Specifically, a 2022 study by McKinsey & Company found that certain traditionally underrepresented groups have a stronger than average preference for remote or hybrid work arrangements and may be likelier to leave their job if remote work or hybrid work was not available to them. We encourage the board to consider the diversity, equity, inclusion implications of any remote work statutory language, specifically as it relates to Governor Newsom's Executive Order N1622. So those are kind of our general overarching comments. With respect to the draft language that the committee discussed a couple weeks ago, we do have concerns about the proposal to have each pharmacist who is performing remote processing executing a consent, acknowledging that the board may inspect their remote work location. It reads as though this proposed provision would require pharmacists to preemptively waive their Fourth Amendment protection under the United States Constitution against unreasonable searches and seizures, which generally applies to searches and inspections in non-criminal matters. I would encourage members of the board to consider whether they would agree to give carte blanche authorization to a public officer to enter their homes, and whether such a requirement might have a chilling effect. We believe that such a requirement would have a chilling effect on the practice of remote processing, and therefore we recommend that this requirement be removed from the proposed statutory language. While we believe it is reasonable to ask the pharmacist in charge to attest to the need for pharmacist remote work, we are concerned about the proposal to have a pharmacist in charge sign a determination under penalty of perjury that reliance on remote work will not be used as a means to or lead to reduced staffing levels in the pharmacy. Business conditions are dynamic and may necessitate changes in staffing at any time. For example, if a nearby medical practice moves in or out of an area, that may necessitate changes in staffing.
10 seconds.
And lastly, we would encourage the board to remove the restriction on using laptops, as that's really a business decision. So thank you for the opportunity to provide comment on this topic.
Thank you for the comments, Dr. Gray.
And we're going to take one last glance for requests. Seeing none, would you like to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you, moderator. We will have ample opportunities to discuss topic and our next couple of the licensing committee meetings. There will be some tough decisions that we all will need to make a decision on remote processing in the next couple months. So we'll bring that up in a probably next meeting. Next item is discussion and consideration of changes to the board's sample CPA related to medication-assisted treatment to remove the Data 2000 waiver reference. As reflected in the meeting materials in October 2020, the board released a sample CPA collaborative practice agreement for pharmacists to provide medication-assisted treatment to patients with opioid use disorder in collaboration with a medical provider. With recent changes at the federal level, the sample agreement requires an update to remove reference to the Data 2000 requirement, as federal law no longer contains such a requirement. During our meeting, we noted agreement with a change, as the CPA is just a resource available for pharmacists. Formal action by the board is not needed. Members, do you have any comments or questions on this agenda item? Seeing none, we'll open up for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this item, please click on that Q&A icon, type comment into the text field, and submit that request. If you're a call-in user, you may dial *3 to raise your hand. Not seeing any requests in the Q&A, nor any hand raises. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel and return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you, moderator. All right, moving on to the next item is C, discussion and consideration of possible regulations to implement Government Code Section 16.5 related to digital signatures and development of policy to facilitate policy statement to facilitate implementation of digital signatures on applications and other notices. Members, background information is included in the meeting materials. Generally speaking, there are provisions in the California law that allow for a public entity to accept digital signatures under specified conditions. Regulations further specify the two forms of acceptable technology: public key cryptography and signature dynamics. During the committee meeting, we reviewed the issue and noted agreement with the general policy offered by staff, the draft policy statements included, and the need for regulations to permanently establish the provisions. As if we did not have a quorum, the committee could not take actions. As such, if the board would like to move forward to implement provisions for digital signatures, a motion will be required. As indicated in the meeting materials, public comment was also received in support of the staff recommendation. For your reference, the draft policy statement is included in attachment 3. Before I open to members, any questions or comments on this issue? With that, if you could make a motion, if you're in agreement with this direction.
I move to approve the draft policy statement to establish the requirements for digital signatures, including the use of public key cryptography as the acceptable technology as provided in the meeting materials.
Thank you, Trevor.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate it. Any other member comments? Seeing none, we're ready for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've again opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on the motion before you, please use the Q&A box to submit the word comment. If you're a calling user, you may dial *3 to raise your hand. And I'll pause for just a moment to allow requests. We have a request from Stephen Gray. Stephen, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
The opportunity to comment on this. I personally have a lot of experience in working with the DEA on pilot programs for the prescribing and ordering of controlled substances, and are very familiar with public key cryptography. It is not clear from the policy statement whether that is the only technology that is allowed for electronic signatures. In other words, currently, historically, the DEA started out for electronic prescriptions to require public key cryptography, but abandoned that when it proved to be too expensive and too onerous on prescribers across the country. So one could read this policy statement as saying that that's the only thing the board will accept, when in fact the technology accepted by the Drug Enforcement Administration and other federal government agencies accepts other technologies. So I'd like, first of all, I would suggest that also the board during its discussions might want to refer back to those other technologies, get expert opinion, and also refer to the federal law called the e-sign law, which was adopted as the law of the country for accepting basically all electronic signatures unless specifically applied for and approved by the government. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments, Dr. Gray.
Thank you. And it looks like that's our only request. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel and return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. With that, any other member comments before we go for the vote? Seeing none. Maria, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Maria. Renee, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Trevor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Jesse, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Jose, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. KK, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Ricardo, how do you vote? Ricardo? Ricardo, how do you vote?
I do
Ricardo?
see he is still connected, but he is muted.
Oh. It's okay. I think we have the majority 7, so we'll just, I vote yes, the motion passes. All right, next item is discussion and consideration of licensing statistics. Members, attachment 4 includes updated licensing statistics. These numbers have been updated since the committee meeting to include data through March. The board has received 10,403 initial applications as well as 358 requests for temporary licenses. The board has issued 6,289 permanent licenses and an additional 252 temporary licenses. Board staff also provided updated processing times. As was reported during the committee meeting, the board recently filled the sole position responsible for processing pharmacy technician applications, a position that was vacated at the end of November. In the last week, the processing time has decreased to 72 days. I would anticipate that will continue to decrease. As I reported as part of the Organizational Development Committee, there are several vacancies in the licensing unit. like the improvements with the pharmacy technician program. As positions are filled and onboarding occurs, I would anticipate similar improvements in other licensing programs. As I did during the committee meeting, I would like to again express my sincere appreciation to licensing staff who continue to balance this workload with vacancies. I truly appreciate your commitment to applicants and Californians. Thank you so much. Members, any comments? Seeing none, moderator, please open the line for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've again opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this last item for the licensing committee report, please use that Q&A panel to send the word comment to me, or you can dial *3 if you're a call-in user to raise your hand. And seeing no requests, would you like me to close the Q&A panel and return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you so much. All right. We look forward to reviewing the statistics during our next meeting in July, at which time we will monitor the progress on processing times and review 3-year comparison data on license workload. Thank you, everyone. With that, we're ready to move on to the next agenda item, Legislation and Regulation Committee. I will turn the meeting over to Chairperson Crowley to provide a report on the Legislation and Regulation Committee's meeting yesterday.
Thank you, President O. On behalf
Thank
of the
you.
Legislation and Regulation Committee meeting, I am pleased to report on the committee's meeting yesterday and actions taken. I would like to acknowledge my fellow committee members for their hard work, including Jose de la Paz, Trevor Chandler, KK Job, Maria Serpa, and Nicole Tebow. During our meeting yesterday, we considered several measures. Today, as part of the report, I will be asking for the board's consideration of several committee recommendations. As legislation is very dynamic, there have been changes to some measures since the release of the meeting materials. In general, I do not plan to extensively read the information contained in the meeting materials. However, where changes have been identified, I will highlight them for members. The meeting slides will display the committee recommendations where appropriate. I will also summarize discussion from the meeting. Members, Assembly Bill 317 would require a healthcare service plan and specify disability insurers that offer coverage for a service that is within the scope of practice of a pharmacist to pay or reimburse the cost of services performed by a pharmacy at an in-network or out-of-network pharmacy as specified. As the meeting materials note, the licensing committee has received public comment from pharmacists detailing barriers to patient care stemming from a lack of reimbursement. The measure is sponsored by the California Pharmacy Association and the National Community Pharmacists Association. As a committee, we considered if the measure should be amended to indicate that pharmacists should be included. The committee also received comments in support of the measure, with some public comments suggesting that amendments should be offered to include pharmacists. As a committee, we considered the possible change, but ultimately noted that the board's role focuses on consumer protection. Following discussion, the committee is recommending that the board establish a support position on the measure. Committee members, do you have any additional comments? Hearing none. Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Thank you. With the committee motion serving as a motion, moderator, we are ready for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've opened that Q&A panel. Please submit the word comment if you'd like to make a comment on this item. If you're a call-in user, you can dial *3. Our first comment comes from Corey Nelson. Corey, I've sent a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on AB 317. My name is Corey Nelson. I'm an ambulatory pharmacy manager with the health system in the Central Valley. AB 317 is a well-intended bill to ensure pharmacists are paid for their cognitive services. However, this bill falls short by requiring payments to community pharmacies and not to the pharmacists who are providing the service. I urge the board to consider supporting only if amended. Most other states are ensuring these services are covered via medical benefits and billable by pharmacists as the provider of care, mostly by having pharmacists use the same billing codes as other practitioners. This is a much better outcome for patients as it ensures a much wider patient population is able to access this service. DHCS recently started an MTM pharmacy service to provide payments for these services for Medi-Cal beneficiaries. Unfortunately, this new program falls short. Pharmacists across the state are practicing in health systems and physicians' offices and providing this care to patients in clinics alongside the primary care providers. In email conversations with DHCS, it's clear that these pharmacists are not able to bill for their services. The payment is only available to brick and mortar pharmacies. Pharmacists are practicing in clinics are providing these services to patients 100% of their time, and yet they're left out. While I do support our community colleagues obtaining reimbursement for these services, I would urge this payment is delivered directly to pharmacists. Many pharmacy platforms are already providing interoperability between standard E&M billing as well as pharmacy-based billing. In fact, AB 1286 is a separate bill proposed this legislation that highlights the strain on community pharmacists' time that is becoming a patient safety issue. By limiting payment to community pharmacies, AB 317 leaves the vast majority of patients who would benefit from these services unable to receive them. In fact, this bill takes the shortcomings of the DHCS MTM benefit and makes them more permanent and expands them to all payers in the state. The board's role is to protect the public, not the profession of pharmacy. I understand that, but AB 317 codifies that only a small percentage of the public would benefit from these pharmacy services. Amending this bill would ensure all patients are able to benefit from MTM services or comprehensive medication management services. I urge the board to consider supporting this bill only if amended to adjust the wording to provide payment to pharmacists for their cognitive services. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next comment comes from Keith Yoshizuka. Keith, I've sent you a request to unmute your microphone.
California Society of Health System Pharmacists. I offered testimony yesterday morning before the Legislation and Regulation Committee, and I will implore the board again today, as discussed, the issue of covering pharmacists as opposed to only pharmacies. The pharmacists in the ambulatory care clinics operate in a medical clinic, not in a brick and mortar pharmacy. The medical clinic is not licensed as a pharmacy. By opening it up to pharmacists, we're increasing access to care to the public, which is, I think, one of the charges before the Board of Pharmacy, to protect the public and assure that patients have access to care. Put it in reference, scope. A large HMO in the state of California employs several pharmacists, and in fact, the number of ambulatory care pharmacists working in medical clinics outnumbers the number of pharmacists both in the outpatient pharmacies and inpatient pharmacies combined. So that tells you something about the scope of the impact this could have. Now, we can increase the number of pharmacists in ambulatory care clinics in private medical offices. The current drawback is that the medical groups see that the pharmacist services cannot be reimbursed, so they're hesitant to undertake that. Just for the purposes of efficiency, studies at Stanford have shown that, at least in the area of anticoagulant treatment and maintenance, that pharmacists do a superior job to physician assistants and nurse practitioners, and even physicians, in managing the anticoagulant treatment. So, as the last speaker requested, I also would ask you to take a position of support if amended by including pharmacists and not just pharmacies. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next comment comes from Michelle Rivas. Michelle, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Michelle Rivas with the California Pharmacists Association. We want to thank the Legislative Committee for your recommendation of a straight support on this legislation and respectfully request that the board concur with the committee's recommendation. I think there was a great discussion yesterday around some of the issues that the individuals who would prefer that the board take a supportive amended position. Again, we strongly urge the board to take a support position. These issues, as you all know, dealing with payment and health plans is a very complicated issue to deal with. And we want to make sure that the intention of the bill is realized if we're successful. So we are having a number of conversations with individuals. And again, we urge the board to continue with the support position on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next comment comes from Dr. Mitchell Pelter. And Doctor, I'm looking for you in my list. Please stand by. All right, Doctor, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Me.
We can hear you.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm Dr. Mitchell Pelter. I'm the current chair of the CSHP Government Activities Advisory Committee. However, I'd like to speak as a recent Kaiser Permanente retiree with over 3 decades as a clinical operations manager. I present our AmCare programs as a model also found outside of the Kaiser organization. Let me first preface by saying I do not represent Kaiser. I'm speaking as a retiree, clinical operations manager at one of our medical centers. AmCare pharmacists are one of the largest and fastest areas of growth for our pharmacy organization in Kaiser. Apart from some oncology pharmacists, these pharmacists practice exclusively in medical clinics and physician medical offices. Only a small portion of the AmCare is funded by pharmacy, surprisingly, pharmacy being under Kaiser Foundation Hospital. Most of the funding and areas of largest growth come from the Permanente Medical Group, SCPMG, which is is for-profit, and they do obtain currently some reimbursement for the labor of physicians' assistants and nurse practitioners. And that helps with their staffing, but they get nothing at all for pharmacists, but they do staff with pharmacists. In fact, in the 3 decades, we went from 0 to 90 AmCare pharmacists, mostly with their funding because they enjoy the clinical outcomes. As one physician says, unlike nurse practitioners and PAs, pharmacists don't duplicate the physician's prerogatives. Rather, they're drug experts way and above that of the physicians. Now, we do measure the outcomes. We measure it using the University of North Carolina's ECHO model, and we add productivity, ECHO being economic, clinical, humanistic outcomes. And they are stellar, and we've got a lot of data on that. And we frequently monitor it and do so robustly. Some form of reimbursement to the medical group, even if modest, could help in furthering staffing needs by these talented pharmacists. All this to say, there is a one-to-one link between reimbursement for pharmacists rather than pharmacy and meeting patient care needs. And I heard yesterday at testimony, they didn't quite get that link, but if we get more funding, we'll get more pharmacists. We get more pharmacists, we can do more good for the patient, and we've got the data to show. So I'd like to encourage your support for this bill, but amended to recognize reimbursement for pharmacists and not pharmacy. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Our next comment comes from Dr. Stephen Gray. Dr. Gray, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak again. As I indicated yesterday, the bill's flaw is that it only recognizes the reimbursement for pharmacists' cognitive or clinical services. We're not talking about dispensing services. We're talking about pharmaceutical care management, but it only recognizes that when they're attached or working in a pharmacy. The bill could be modified very easily to include both, and I advocate that it includes both because there are many different business models that can be used to provide this additional care to patients. A comment was made yesterday that it is not the job of the Board of Pharmacy to support pharmacists, but that is not quite so. This bill actually would grant a monopoly to pharmacies to get reimbursed for the clinical services provided by their pharmacists. This would exclude, as mentioned, pharmacists that are working in medical offices, in clinics, and in other entities from getting that reimbursement. And so therefore, we recommend again that the bill be modified and that the board support the modification as a patient safety and care measure. Dr. Pelter is well aware of the many studies that have proven across the nation that when pharmacists with their superior knowledge and training and patient contact and having the time in a medical office environment and in a pharmacy, if appropriate, increases the effectiveness and the safety for patient care. Soon there will be many nurse practitioners that will be independent of physician supervision in California. And we find that over the years that we have been doing AmCare, they need the help of pharmacists, and they can have now collaborative practice agreements. The board supported and sponsored legislation in the Sunset Review to grant all pharmacists in California the ability to have collaborative practice agreements with all prescribers, including nurse practitioners and physician's assistants and others. So it is imperative that the proliferation of those pharmacists to provide that assistance when the care gets complicated, when the drugs are highly dangerous, when the patient's conditions are highly dangerous, that they can go to a clinical pharmacist and get the help and the care they need for those patients by making those referrals and collaborative practice agreements. So I encourage you not to support the committee's recommendation, but to in fact support a recommendation, a new motion that would support the bill if amended to cover both clinical practice services by pharmacists inside a pharmacy on behalf of a pharmacy, but also independent of a pharmacy in medical offices, clinics, and other places where literally thousands of pharmacists are already providing that service and have been doing it for several decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next comment comes from Jeff Joliffe. Jeff, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Say more eloquently what Dr. Gray just said, but I do want to support what his statement was and just share a little bit about what happens here. I'm a pharmacy director of programs here at Kern Medical in Bakersfield, California. We have a county of 900,000 people and about 117,000 diabetics. We only have 7 endocrinologists and a primary care shortage, and our clinical pharmacists here at the hospital have been providing a diabetes clinic and other chronic disease stage clinics with superior outcomes. I mean, I am so proud of our team. A1Cs dropped by 2.5% on enrollment into our clinic. They take a very good care of these patients. But this bill, without amending it to say pharmacist or a pharmacy clinic, would hamper our ability to expand our services to our patient population here in Kern County. So I do support an amendment because we want to expand these services. We definitely need that. I don't have an outpatient pharmacy attached to our health system anymore. We had to close that last year, and this bill, without the amendment, would prevent us from expanding services. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Our next comment comes from John Grubbs. John, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
The comments that have been made by previous speakers already that, you know, the benefits of
pharmacists practicing in an ambulatory clinical setting are well established. In the University of California, who I represent, has been working hard to provide more pharmacists to manage our patients with chronic diseases in our clinics. And the biggest barrier to that has been the financing part. They so far have limited abilities to bill for their services, so the cost of those pharmacists have to be borne by the health system. And we support an amendment to this bill that would allow pharmacists to be reimbursed for those services. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Our next comment will be from Dan Kudo. Dan, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you kindly. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. As stated at the beginning of the meeting, the board is charged with the responsibility of ensuring public safety. Healthcare is changing rapidly, and there's a widening gap in the demand for medical services due to the aging of the population and the number of available physicians. According to the Association of American Medical Colleges, the shortage of primary care physicians will be nearly 40,000 by the year 2034. The clinical pharmacist is an important element to filling the gap, which will promote patient safety. There are many pharmacists that participate in ambulatory care clinics that are not within a licensed pharmacy yet. They clearly promote patient safety by ensuring the efficacy and safety of medications taken by their patients. While professional organizations are working with the bill's author to modify the language to include pharmacists within and outside of pharmacies, I also believe that the Board of Pharmacy should consider supporting a modification to include all pharmacists in this bill. The commitment to the role of the pharmacist to patient safety is not limited to those practicing physically within a pharmacy. The commitment to patient safety should include all practicing pharmacists within California. We as clinical pharmacists are all focused on ensuring the safety of the patients we treat. Ambulatory care pharmacists are highly trained, many of which have board certification and advanced pharmacist licensure. I urge the board to take these thoughts seriously in its deliberation. Thank you kindly for the opportunity to speak to the board.
Thank you. Our next comment comes from Max O. Max, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 to unmute.
Has been said about reimbursement for the pharmacists instead of the pharmacies. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next comment comes from David Lash. David, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
I just wanted to call and reiterate all of the points that were made before me. Everybody has said it much better than myself, but I am a registered APH pharmacist. I work in the Central Valley. I see and also manage pharmacists in ambulatory care clinics. And as others have very eloquently stated, the most challenging portion of our job is really the reimbursement structure and getting reimbursed for our services. And amending this bill will do well to help us with these revenue streams and ensure that we can treat our patients adequately, especially for myself and others who work in already underserved populations. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final request, at least at this moment, is going to come from Jeff Olson. Jeff, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. As you hear from the many comments, there's a lot of support for amending the bill to include pharmacists, and not necessarily just in a outpatient pharmacy setting, but in clinics and in the work that they do to provide care and management of patients that require it. There was a comment that was made about shortage of practitioners and the ability to manage a lot of these really complex disease states using medication therapy. It really does fall onto the pharmacist to do that, and the outcomes are very clear in a lot of studies that pharmacists do make a huge impact in the outcomes. So I support all the previous comments made so far, and would like just to throw my hat in there for the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I see no additional requests from the public. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you.
It is closed. We do have a raised hand from member Serpa.
Perfect. Before I go to you, Maria, I will say I greatly appreciate all of the engagement on this topic. I think it's an extremely important one. Personally, having digested some of the comments from yesterday and listening to the comments today, I do agree that including pharmacists could actually improve patient access and encourage pharmacists to continue providing expanded services to their community. And so I hope that we can continue having this discussion and see where all of our board members kind of lay, having heard some more public comments. So I'll start with you, Maria.
Thank you. Again, at the Reg meeting and today, it's very impressive to hear the overwhelming support of including pharmacists in this bill. Also, if you note, one of the public comment was from the bill's sponsor, a pharmacy organization. And so hopefully they have heard all of your comments also. And it is their bill, and they can work with the author should they choose to include pharmacists. Interestingly enough, the sponsor is asking the board only for support and does not request us to go to support if amended. I found that a little bit interesting, but there could be other things in consideration. But overwhelming, I think the intent is to provide better services to patients, to assure that they have pharmacists accessible and being paid for their services.
Thank you. And I apologize, I can't see any hand raises. So if you do have a comment, please feel free to just speak up.
This is Renee. Basically I would reiterate kind of what you also mentioned, Jesse. It seems very applicable to include pharmacists, not just at a pharmacy. So I hope there's just more discussion and the possible outcome of also including pharmacists to provide more care for patients.
Great, thank you, Renee. I will say, I think one of the discussion points we touched upon is where the pharmacist reimbursement would actually come into play, specifically when they're working under a different employer, say they don't necessarily own the pharmacy, or if they're part of a chain. So that may get a little complicated. And so if there are members who are looking to maybe change this to a support if amended, I would be curious to see what we all think in terms of the specific language that it is that we would be asking for. Okay, if there are no other member comments, then President O, I can turn it over to you for the vote.
Thank you, Chair Crowley. We will go for the vote. The committee recommendation is to support. Thank you for the great comments. Maria, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Renee. How do you vote?
Can I ask, so I'm just trying to clarify. So I know the recommended position is to support, and based on what we've heard. So moving it forward, there's still opportunity to introduce some possible changes to the language. Is that what I understand?
Well, this is a legislative proposal, as you know, Renee, and I would say that we can't predict what it would happen in legislative cycle, but support position, it just means that we are supporting it, but it's not clear, so I can have Chair Crowley speak to that. And you can go ahead, Anne. You're wanting to talk.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's appropriate, so I'm apologizing in advance if you don't want to hear from me. But I'm taking notes right on all of the conversation, and even if the board does, depending on what the board does, right, all of these comments, the intent of what you're talking about will be included in the board's letters. So, if the letter, if the board votes to, support as recommended by the committee, the language of the letter will absolutely include the comments specific to, consideration. It would just be the board's position would be support, and then we'd be encouraging consideration. I don't know if that's helpful, but sorry about that.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, I will say yes to support.
Thank you, Renee. Trevor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Jesse, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Jose, how do you vote?
I just came back, but I did not listen to all the details on the items. I'll abstain.
Thank you, Jose. KK, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ricardo, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. And I vote yes, the motion passes. All right, back to you, Chair Crowley.
Thank you. And just a question, President O, did you have a specific time that you wanted to break for lunch?
I'm thinking probably 12 o'clock for 45 minutes.
Okay.
So we'll just keep on pushing. We probably can get through a couple more.
Perfect. Thank you. So members, the next measure for our consideration is Assembly Bill 602. The measure was heard in committee on April 18th. The measure passed through committee as a consent item. This measure would require the board to report to the legislature on or before February 28th, 2025, the total number of times a pharmacist refilled a prescription for a dangerous drug without a prescriber's authorization. Further, it would require the board to report the total number of complaints the board receives alleging that a pharmacist failed to refill a prescription because the prescriber was unable to, and would require the board to make a reasonable effort to determine how many of these complaints resulted from a pharmacist's failure to refill a prescription due to a lack of understanding of the authority vested in pharmacists to refill the prescription. During our discussion yesterday, we noticed some of the implementation challenges raised in the meeting materials, including the variability within pharmacy systems. Following discussion, the committee is recommending a watch position on the measure. The committee did not receive any public comment on the measure. Committee members, do you have any additional comments? Hearing none. Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Thank you. With the committee motion serving as a motion moderator, we are ready for public comment.
Thank you. I've again opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on AB 602, please use that Q&A panel to submit the word comment. As well, if you are a call-in user, you may raise your hand by dialing *3, and I will allow just a moment to receive those requests. We have a comment from Stephen Gray. Dr. Gray, I have sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you again for the opportunity to comment. As I look at this bill, I reflect back on how important it was and how unique it was for California to be probably the first state in the nation to grant pharmacists the ability to use their professional judgment to refill a prescription when that does not have an authorized refill from the prescriber, when they cannot reach the prescriber in a timely manner in order to serve the patient. This has proven to be of great service, not only to patients, but of great safety concerns that has prevented interruptions in therapy, exacerbation of conditions while they're waiting to get a hold of a prescriber that may be an independent practice prescriber that doesn't have covering physicians or other things. And it has worked out very well for several decades. I note that the committee really isn't enthusiastic about this bill, but it does require a lot of record keeping on behalf of pharmacists, pharmacies, et cetera, a lot of information that the board has to collect and make. And I'm searching for a reason in the discussion as what problem are we trying to solve with this bill? You know, I am aware of nothing that has come forward and said that there's a major problem with pharmacists using their professional judgment to continue therapy with maintenance medications, some of them high-risk medications, some of them dangerous medications that if they stop for even a few days or a week or more in order to reach a prescriber, it could result in serious harm to the patient. And so I'm looking for what problem is this trying to solve to put the healthcare system of California to all that trouble and expense, to modify huge systems in order to keep the records that is required under the bill. And so I would encourage the board to take an opposed position until it gets more information about the jeopardy that this would put patients in, and or more information about what problem it's trying to solve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gray.
And with that, I see no additional requests for comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you. Members, if you don't have any additional comments, I can turn it over to President O for the vote.
Thank you, Chair Crawley. Maria, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Renee, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Trevor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Jesse, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Jose, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. KK, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Ricardo, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. And I vote yes, the motion passes. It is 12 o'clock. If it is agreeable, we will take a lunch break. We will come back at 12:45. 12:45, and we'll resume.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you back.
Mhm.